Hello, everyone. My name is Noam Dror. I'm the VP of Solution Engineering here at SecuPi. Today, we're going to talk about PCI version 4, how to automate the compliance in that space. And with me, my partner for this webinar, Carl. Why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself?
Hey guys, nice to meet you all. My name's Carl. I'm the CTO of a consulting company called FWD View, based out of the UK and US, and we cover quite a lot of EMEA. We specialize primarily in financial services and work across things like data protection, data governance, and obviously a partner with SecuPi.
That's perfect. We love partners. So let's start with some basic questions, right? So Carl, maybe I'll ask you, what is PCI, and what is new about PCI version 4?
Yeah, sure. PCI is basically you kind of classify it as a regulation, even though it isn't actually regulatory or mandatory in that way. It basically stands for the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. And there was a number of versions before version 4, as you can imagine, if we're on version 4. It's actually a way to control or to ensure that people that work with things like credit card information, payment information, a way to control that and to make sure that kind of people aren't doing things that they shouldn't with that sort of data. It was actually instead of being started by like a regulator, like we've seen in EMEA with things like GDPR, it was actually a joint venture with a number of kind of credit card companies in the US. So there was MasterCard, American Express, Visa, JCB, and I think Discover. And they still work together to kind of hold the mandate of managing kind of PCI 4 and the policies. One of the things that's quite interesting about PCI 4 is the fact that it's because it's not kind of regulatory compliance. There's no kind of you haven't got a regulator that is breathing down your neck. And like where GDPR and DORA and all those, that kind of regulation, you're required to be compliant, and if you're not, then somebody's going to sit and audit you in that way. PCI 4 works in what I'd argue to be a more effective way. And that is by, if you are not compliant, then it's going to be the credit card companies that kind of hold the key to that. So to give you kind of an example, if you are found not to be compliant for PCI 4, then the credit card companies could stop allowing you to take payments for, say, Visa or MasterCard. And arguably, a fine is obviously bad. So if you get, I think the fine's up to like $50,000, or $500,000, I should say. That's obviously going to affect you as a business, but actually removing the ability for you to be able to take payment.
Run your business. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think in some ways that's quite an elegant way of forcing you, or kind of making you take interest. I think it's something that the regulators, with things like GDPR, obviously there are a number of organizations whereby you can turn around and say we're going to fine you, and they just put it on their bottom line and carry on. They make so much money anyway. As you say, taking away the capability for you to accept, to kind of make money or to accept money from organizations is, I think is a kind of a great idea.
Yeah.
One of the things worth mentioning is that kind of PCI version 4 that started in April the 1st, 2024. They have what they call a transition period, so they move from PCI version 3 over to version 4. It takes about a year, but it's introduced some kind of nice requirements that, as a somebody that uses credit cards and payment information, I'm quite pleased that they're introducing these things to protect my information personally.
Yeah, makes sense. So I noticed, 3 big things in version 4 that definitely impact, how we can help customers. The first one is what they call customized approach. So in version 4, you're allowed to do something that is not by the standard as long as you can show that it's equal or better than what PCI standard asks you to do, right? For example, if you want to mask data instead of encrypt it, which means it's completely irreversible, that's a stronger, thing to do. Or if you want to enforce more fine-grained access controls, leveraging new authorization models, of course, you will be able to do that. So that's an important thing. The second thing that I noticed is that there is more stringent access control and encryption mechanisms, right? Most important part is that now you have to encrypt the credit card number on its own, right? So it's not enough to encrypt everything. You still need to encrypt everything, but the credit card number needs to be encrypted on its own. So that's super important because that's very tough on, older technology. So that's one. And two, you have to make sure that you authenticate every user with the individual ID. You have to identify, you have to manage the access to credit card information. And that becomes very difficult, especially when you talk about databases, because databases usually work with generic accounts, system accounts, application accounts, service accounts. They usually don't have individual accounts for users. And that is something that is now required.
Yeah. I think that's actually brings up a really good point about why it's quite more, well, it has a little bit more common sense about it than kind of some other kind of regulations, in the fact that having the ability to be, kind of customized, sometimes you can get so rigid in the fact that you must do something this way. If you do, those kind of regulations can take a little while for them to, kind of work through a system and be approved, and therefore the technology kind of moves forward. And you can end up with certain regulation that you're not regulatory compliant because you're actually doing something better, which is kind of a tricky situation to be in as an organization, especially for things like banks, whereby, to be regulatory compliant is super important for all the visibility that it gives to both customers and partners and all that kind of thing. So then that customization is kind of really key. The other thing that you mentioned there as well, which I think is super important, is that ability to kind of see who's done what as well. So I think, again, there's so much regulation or so much just general compliance is based on, we must not allow anybody to access this data. Also being able to see whether somebody has or hasn't. Maybe somebody has tried to do something that they shouldn't. It allows you to be kind of have a little bit more kind of awareness of things maybe that would stop somebody eventually getting access. So I think that's a really good point about the logging that I think not many people realize when it comes to PCI 4.
Exactly. The last thing that I like about the new version 4, one last section that they added, is that you need to have resiliency in terms of your security practices against emerging threats.
Yes.
Right? So that's, of course, because there's a hack every day, there's a new vulnerability every day. So you need to be on top of it. It's not enough just to wait for your QSA to be done, on a scheduled basis, because vulnerabilities are coming like every minute.
Yeah.
So that means you need to have some sort of compensating controls, right? So if you have a vulnerability somewhere, and that's where we can come in and say, you know what, your application might be vulnerable, but your data is encrypted, the application will not be able to see that data, right? Unless it goes through a specific process. Or your database might be vulnerable, but again, the data will be encrypted there. So even if someone exploits that vulnerability, they won't be able to see that data. So compensating controls until you can deal with the vulnerability are super important for those kind of environments, right?
Yeah. And I think that kind of, again, feeds kind of well into the way that PCI 4 has been, or just PCI in general, has been structured, in that it relies on kind of regular targeted risk analysis, in the fact that you, depending on how much PCI 4 affects you. And what I mean by that is, so one of the things that again I didn't mention was the fact that PCI 4 is not just for banks and financial services and payment companies. It's literally for anybody that processes information.
Any merchant.
any merchant. And I think what is good is the fact that it's not going to put a massive overhead on, say, for instance, small organizations where they're not persisting the information because they're using, an organization like FIS or WorldPay for the
third parties.
payments. And so it's actually quite well balanced.
Yeah.
And if you are a payment provider, then you're going to have 3 monthly, kind of regular compliance questionnaires. You're going to have a lot more focus, but then for the organizations which rely less on that, it's like every 12 months. So I think that's again something that means that it's affects everybody, but it's also it's not meaning that if you're a small organization you have to still invest as heavily, which I think again is kind of really important to highlight.
Makes sense. So let me ask you another question then. What do you think are the biggest challenges around PCI version 4? What you see from customers, right?
Yeah. So Forward View, we obviously focus primarily on financial services. So that this is like a really big, a big question that we get asked a lot. I think a lot of organizations want to be able to kind of see what other people are doing as well in relation to this. I think there's a couple of main challenges. I think that the first one is awareness, actually. So people are kind of aware that there is PCI 4. They're not necessarily aware of, kind of all the details. So I think one of the things that's quite useful is kind of sessions like this, and there's some information on various websites and things about kind of summarizing it. I would suggest everybody kind of just go through some of those summaries and see that information and see where they fit in. Again, it comes back to the point we made earlier, whereby it doesn't mean that it's going to, just because you're a bank doesn't mean you have to go into this and spend, millions of pounds to do the compliance. So just understanding that level of where you need to fit, I think is kind of very important. The second thing that kind of comes off that is really understanding the changes. So we've had lots of conversations with our customers where there's a bit of confusion between PCI 4 and PCI 3, maybe what they've done previously and then what they need to do. We talk about things like masking, we talk about tokenization, we talk about encryption. There's some real specifics that maybe kind of need to be mentioned there, and it's understanding where kind of what they are and how they are aligned to you. I think the third challenge is primarily down to how you enforce PCI 4. Again, some of PCI 4 is all about understanding the risk, similar to like GDPR, understanding the risk, making sure that things are documented and assigned, and it goes back to the first two challenges, be understood as well. But also you do need the ability to, if you're going to tokenize, you need to be able to tokenize in an effective way. One of the changes that they've added, slightly ambiguous, is where they define strong cryptography with associated key management is basically AMP procedures. How you do that is kind of with the technology that you have can be tricky to kind of define. So yeah, those would probably be the three things that I would kind of we see the most.
So that's good. So you know about the challenges. So then the obvious next question is, how does Forward View can help customers comply with different types of regulations, but specifically with PCI?
It comes down to a couple of things really, which is that Forward View is not a kind of a standard consultancy company whereby we focus just on the technology. I think the big thing is aligning that business process with the technology. And I suppose you can invest in any technology, but unless you know how best to leverage it, your ROI is always going to be diminished in some respects. Yeah. So one of the things that we do at Forward View is we have a kind of a PCI 4 readiness process. So what we'll do is we'll go and initially will be business driven. So we have things like BAs and various people like that that come and look at what you have and focus on it from a compliance perspective for PCI 4. And then we transition over to the technology. So, for example, one of our customers, they kind of had they have a big requirement for PCI 4 because they processed credit card information. And they kind of had the process that they needed, but they couldn't work out how to represent that in the technology, which was SecuPi.
Yeah.
So again, it was all the features are there in SecuPi, but it's kind of how you translate that. So what we tend to spend quite a lot of time we're regularly called like the glue in the middle, in the fact that initially starts off with the business process with the technology in mind, and then transition into technology. The second thing that we do is we have we call it a masking library, but it's not specifically a masking it's not specifically a masking library. It's basically a collection of specific PCI 4 techniques. So, for example, if somebody says they want to do tokenization, then we'll talk about format preserving encryption, because we know that with credit card numbers, it needs to be the same length. Otherwise, things like applications will break. If it's no good to kind of creating encryption is bigger or smaller, it starts breaking things. And really just making sure that they can get that kind of accelerator, if you like, into leveraging it. And the third thing that we do is really about having, we have what we call virtual center of excellences. Excuse me, and that is where we put the business people and the technology people all together. But it also means that it can be, say, for example, you could have Calibra as a data governance platform. You could have SecuPi, as kind of your security and your encryption platform. And it's about having experience of both and bringing them together. And that way you get a much better return on investment, because you're kind of shortcutting that process.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
One of the things I would ask is, obviously, if you talk about PCI 4 and kind of what functionality of SecuPi is relevant for PCI 4, I think that would be a good thing for people to understand.
Yeah, sure. So, we talked about what is required in version 4, what's new about it, right? So one of the most important thing was that you need to have the PAN encrypted inside the database separately than the entire database. So you can encrypt the entire database, but just encrypting the entire database or the disk is not enough anymore. And this is one thing that we can definitely do, right? We can encrypt data in a field level that we are using format preserver encryption. That's a NIST standard that complies with the regulation, vaultless tokenization. And that's one way we can help. Another way we can help is the requirement to do multi-factor authentication. And usually if you have a legacy database or something that doesn't support multi-factor authentication, that's a problem. We can allow users to, or force users to authenticate using multi-factor authentication, but then log them into the database with the credentials we vault. And of course, you can rotate those credentials so you can comply with multi-factor authentication, even if your data sources are not supporting it. So that's not a nice thing.
And that's actually a big thing that people struggle with, because the MFA, the multi-factor authentication, is kind of one of the new requirements, or the big ones, and it is something that people struggle with because so much technology doesn't allow you to do that.
Right.
And again, it's you then have to look at alternatives and additional processes and procedures that effectively slow you down without that MFA.
Right.
So that's again a challenge that we see regularly.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
And another thing that they usually require is a tamper detection mechanism for any payment application. So how do you know something has changed, right? You need to understand how it works. The nice thing about the way we work is that we kind of work in an overlay to the application and overlay to the database. And we create our own log that is not connected to the application and is not connected to the database. So now you can actually compare the SecuPi log with the application log, or the SecuPi log with the database log, And if those are not the same, then
Mm.
someone is tampering with your log, right? So we can help you detect that kind of, if someone is trying to hack your system, we will help you understand that because it's a kind of a transparent system. Not the hackers will not know about its existence, and it will
Yeah.
show you, what exactly is happening, as opposed to the log that, can be changed by a hacker, for example, right?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a good point because if a lot of the kind of cyber attacks that you see is they're kind of covering their tracks
Right,
almost before it happens, so that having that additional layer, kind of unless they know about it and they know how to access it and
right,
all those kind of things, it's they might not even realize.
right,
And think they're covering the tracks, but that they're kind of not. Um, and I think one of the key things about kind of PCI 4 is really that it's trying to get you to prevent everything happening in the first place. So even
yeah,
though it has things like the tokenization and the requirements of once somebody gets in there, but it really does try and bring that forward. I think that it has a lot of focus on cybersecurity and cyber attacks and that kind of thing, which
right,
is new over the previous versions for that reason.
yeah,
So and that's actually a really cool bit of
right,
functionality that I think will
right.
accept a lot of organizations.
Another requirement they have, and I'm trying now to kind of combine a few.
Mm.
PCI has something called CDE, that's the cardholder data environment. So you
Mhm.
need to kind of segment your PCI environment separately. If you take that together with, you need to authenticate and identify each user individually and not just use application accounts and service accounts. And if you understand what you need to do, then what we can do with SecuPi is to say, we understand who's the original user, we understand where they're coming from, so we can create that boundary for you. We can say, of course, you will still need firewalls and you will still need network controls, but on the data layer, when you want to protect the data, we can understand who's the original user. So you're not just using application accounts and system accounts. We will actually apply the policies on the original user, and we see where they're coming from, and we can decide if they're coming from the credit card data environment or outside of it. And we will apply different policy according to who's the user and where they're coming from. So that's another way we can help you, comply with some of the requirements. So that's usually big for customers because it's very difficult in a native database or native applications to understand what you can do. The only thing you can do is block, but sometimes you don't want to block. Sometimes you need that data, but you need it in a different way, right? Maybe it needs to be encrypted, maybe it needs to be generalized, maybe it needs to be, some of it needs to be masked. So we provide that ability to do that. That another thing about that CDE is that how do you know that you included everything in your CDE if you don't know what's outside of that CDE? So we
Yeah.
have the ability to scan and show you that you do have, maybe you do have credit card data outside of that environment that you defined. So it will help you to understand what you need to include in that CDE environment.
I think that there's two kind of almost like key takeaways there for me based on what we see at customers, which is kind of firstly what you're doing is you're introducing in a lot of ways with regulation it's okay not to know the answer, but
Right,
if you have a mechanism that can help you get there,
right,
sometimes that's kind of enough. So I
right,
think being able to turn around and say, look, we encrypt all our kind of PANs and credit card information,
right,
that we know of. It then begs the question, okay, well, how do you know the stuff that you don't know? And therefore, having that kind of proactive approach again is kind of really key with PCI 4. They're trying to get people to realize that, it's okay to not know everything within large financial
yeah,
organizations because
yeah,
there's a lot of legacy stuff. There's a lot of I mean, some of the customers we speak to have got data from mainframes from the 80s in different formats, different and the person that knows and understands that maybe isn't around at that organization anymore because it was 40
right,
years ago. So again, having that mechanism is a real differentiator. And I think you start putting things like that down when you run the questionnaires for the compliance. That's something that really catches the eye of of the people that are actually looking at this, thinking, okay, well, at least they have. So yes, they haven't done this perfect over here, but they do have a mechanism to capture it, and I think that goes a kind of a really long way. I think the other thing that you've mentioned there, it almost comes back to the customization piece that we talked about right at the beginning, whereby not one size fits all. I think that's one of my biggest bugbears just about technology in general, which is that there's always the assumption of, this is how you should do it. Within these large banking organizations, I mean, look at an insurance, if I go slightly off topic, but if you look at an insurance company that is trying to work with policy details, the way they generate that policy information is looking at your postcode or your zip code to find out where you live, because if you live, depending on where you live, depends on the cost of your policy. Therefore, if you mask that within a test environment, then sometimes the application breaks, and therefore your testing doesn't work. So having the ability to have that customization there to turn around and say, you know what, look, for this particular use case, then we're not going to do that because it breaks the whole process. But also having the difference in the ability to do format preserving encryption for things like the credit card number, where we want that to stay, 14 or 15 characters. And then you look at something else within that information whereby, you might want to use a different technique. I think, again, that all fits into so nicely into the customization. And again, organizations get so hung up on that because they're trying to do it to the letter of the law. But with things like this, it makes it a little bit more friendly, a little bit more adoptable, I suppose.
Right.
The word.
It's good that they gave that flexibility option in that version. And then maybe to address the last one that I talked about, the requirement of PCI version 4, the resiliency for emerging threats. So, in my mind, most of the emerging threats at the end comes into a privileged user. So you either have a vulnerability that elevates your access into a privileged user, and then that privileged user can do anything they want, or you have stolen credentials, or you have something that at the end, that privileged user can get access to the credit card information and mess with things around. So right?
SecuPi, what sort of users and audiences are actually being protected then? How do you guys deal with that? I mean, that's again a common question that kind of comes up.
Yeah, so we do use a lot of different, or protect a lot of different users, right? Actually, let's see. I have a slide about that. Let me show you that. Yeah. So share here. So we do have the ability to protect privileged users, right? So if you have any kind of a vulnerability and you need a mitigating control to make sure that from the application, no one is coming into your data, or from anywhere, outside of the database, no one is coming into the data, we have the ability to control what DBAs, DevOps, cloud admins can do inside that data. So even if they have permissions to the database and they can untie the controls that the database have, we are an additional layer on top of it, and therefore we can stop them from doing that. So that's an important part. But then you have different analysts and data scientists that they want to get insights out of that data. So you need to make sure they get the right data. For example, maybe they don't need exact dates. Maybe they look at transactions that have some credit card information, but they don't need a specific, the exact date and time. Maybe it's good enough to be in 1 week or in 1 month or in 1 year. So you can kind of bucket that data. Business users, of course, they go through an application and they look at your data, so we can control what they can do. We see more and more customers telling us, I have a problem, contractual problem, that one of my customers is asking me to make sure that no offshore people have access to clear text data, or that non-citizens do not have access to my specific data, or that people with no clearance do not have access to my specific data. So offshoring or third parties or anything that is a little bit different than the more sensitive user, we can control those types of users. So that's an important part. And then we have a lot of customers that want to monetize their data. So they want to start sharing it and actually charge for that data. So how do you make sure that that data is also safe once you share it, right? So we help customers with that as well. And of course, there's always the problem of non-human accounts, right? Service accounts, they're trying to get access to your data to do something, right? Some automation, but usually you give them very high level permissions, and that can, cause a vulnerability. So that's a big thing.
The thing that I think is key is that, the business or the use cases should be driving the kind of the technology. And I think with this, the fact that you can do based on the use case, depending if whether you're kind of using like an analytics use case or just standard business using use case.
Right.
One thing that would be really, really cool to kind of highlight as well is that the difference that you have between kind of the all the way down to the cell level protection, because I think you highlighted something really interesting there, whereby so with PCI 4, you might not you can't let's say you want to kind of tokenize or encrypt or protect that cardholder information, so like the PAN. Now, one of the cool things is that you might have a load of information there that you want to kind of process, and the PAN is just one of them. And if you look at it it's like a hammer trying to crack a nut, it's like if you then mask all of it or tokenize all of it, then you're limiting those use cases within tests and various other bases. So it'd be good to highlight that, because in that cell level stuff, just it positions itself perfectly into one of the PCI 4 requirements that we get asked the most about, which is I've got all this information, but I need to just stop anyone from seeing this one
specific thing for specific set of customers or specific regions. Right. We see that a lot. That makes a lot of sense. That is true. Let's see. So I think we are about 30 something minutes out of our beginning point. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience. Make sense?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so let me go through the questions. Let's see. First question. What is the difference between tokenization and format preserving encryption? Because we talked about both. Right. So I'll take a first stab at it. So format preserving encryption is a form of tokenization. When you talk about tokenization, you usually talk about a vault where you have the original value and the new value. And then you go to that vault and you know how to switch it. So that's a vault-based tokenization. Format preserving encryption is a vaultless tokenization. Why? Because you don't need a vault. We don't store the original value. We have a key, and that key converts your original data to a new data, and then you put another function on it, and now it becomes the data that it looks like. Let's say if it's a credit card, it would look like a credit card. So it's a vaultless tokenization. So those are very similar things. At the end, they do the same function. They just do it in a different way. That's kind of the answer for that, right?
And I think the kind of the big difference for me regarding the format preserving is really that we're kind of keeping the functionality and the compatibility, which again, if you look at a credit card number that's kind of 14 or 15 digits, if you're American Express, then you basically all your applications and all your end-to-end testing is going to require that to be the same length.
Right.
Doesn't matter what it is, and that I appreciate you're probably going to have something in there that says with the difference between MasterCard and Visa and that kind of thing, but that is actually really, really important. So it's having that flexibility to be able to leverage kind of both really, which I think is kind of important. So yeah, I mean, again, the question regarding format preserving encryption comes up quite regularly, and there's very few organizations have that capability to do that. And when it comes to PCI 4 compliance, they have to register within the questionnaire being, what we can't do this. But,
yeah, makes sense. Let's see, another question I see. Yeah, we mentioned that term. So they ask, what is PAN as it relates to PCI? But we did say PAN without explaining what it is.
Yeah, I must admit, I realized when I was talking about it, I said about masking pans. I was hoping people weren't going to think I was talking about like kitchen pans. So yeah, so a PAN, it stands for primary account number, and it's basically the key piece of cardholder data you're obligated to protect, and that's effectively the card number. And the main reason for that is that it's 15 or 16 digit number on the front of your debit or credit card. And obviously, if you have that, you've got, there's quite a lot you can do with that. I know nowadays that there's certain things on payment platforms where you've got to authorize things with your app, or you've got to put the CVV number in and all that kind of stuff. But it's again, there's you can, if you find that number and you have access to the wider data set, you're then able to you can work out who that person is, you can work out all, kind of maybe what the CVV number, it shouldn't be stored in there. But again, all systems are different. And I think it is one of the key reasons why when you see quite a lot of the data breaches and things that are kind of registered or that we're relatively public, it generally says, your credit card number was not exposed. However, your name and your address and your email and all this kind of stuff was, because it doesn't come under the same regulatory compliance. So they're not necessarily masking or tokenizing that bit, but the PAN, the primary account number, that is. So I think again, it's quite a good way to ensure that we're making it hard for kind of hackers and cyber attacks to get more information than they need, because that's what they'll want to go for. In so many ways, they're not really bothered about the name and that kind of stuff. They want to get to your credit card number so they can go and spend your money. So
that's the lucrative data. But it does come in now with privacy, because usually you store the PAN together with your first name and last name and home address and maybe an email, maybe a phone number. So this is where you get into another regulation, which is for privacy, right?
Yeah.
That's usually how it works. Okay. Let's see, another question they have here. Is the credit card number required to be encrypted at rest? So it's a good question. I'm not sure I'm the authoritative source to say yes or no, but I can say that we have customers that got an approval from their auditor to do encryption in use while putting compensating control on the encryption or access to the data at rest. So there is an ability to do that, but you need to consult your auditor. That would be my kind of response for that. Well, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the interesting thing that is quite sparks a big debate is what actually is at rest. So we hear it as at rest or persistent, and where the challenge comes in is where if you write it to disk, then yeah, that makes sense, that's at rest. But if it's actually persisted within memory, a lot of the systems nowadays have it's persisted in memory, it opens up a whole can of worms. So yeah, I think my understanding with the way you look at it is that the PAN is unreadable anywhere it's stored. It's kind of the way PCI 4 regulation defines it. And I think there's multiple ways you can do that. But again, that is one of the key things that they're going to want you to be able to articulate. So if you turn around and say, is the credit card encrypted at rest? And the answer is no, then obviously that's a big red flag. But if you say no, but, and then you explain, the reasons why, then that's very different. But yeah, I would say it's a big area of defining what at rest is. And to be honest, most organizations will fill these questionnaires in their own interpretation, and therefore, yeah, that sparks quite a lot of debate within our customer.
Makes sense. Okay. So what do you think? Any parting words?
I would probably say that, I mean, I think from our side, I mean, as we mentioned, I suppose the way this webinar is split is, I'm kind of slightly more from the business side, you're slightly more from the the technology side. I think it's all about trying to understand both. That kind of helps you. You could have SecuPi, and you could leverage all its capabilities, or you could attempt to leverage capabilities, but unless you sit and actually understand it and take some of that knowledge, understanding, then that's much harder to kind of get that value. But then on the flip side, if you can have all the business knowledge in the world, but if you haven't got the capability, then then again your questionnaire is going to be pretty short, because they're going to be asking you, what strong cryptography you're using and that kind of stuff. I think the second thing that I would kind of highlight is really about the customization, which is really look for an approach that allows you to use multiple techniques, not just one. I think as the kind of credit card information or card holder information, most organizations are out there to make money, get revenue, and that kind of comes in via those customers that have card numbers registered and all this kind of stuff. So just making sure that you look at these use cases and ensure that whatever technology you use is flexible and customizable, to kind of cover that, rather than just doing one thing. I think that will be my part of advice, I think.
Good. So, mine would be, we see a lot of different requirements in the field. And, what's common about them is that customers want to make it happen quickly and efficiently. They don't have time to develop new stuff. They don't have time to change things. They don't want to recode anything. So I think that's kind of what our expertise is, in making sure that whatever you need, whatever requirements you need for compliance or security, we can make it happen quickly and transparently. So you don't need to do a lot of work on your existing environment, and that's an important part on my side.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to cost as well. It's a lot of the having to do that in a very complicated way is going to cost you more in resource and time spent and that kind of stuff. So I agree, having something that's a lot simpler and more transparent, like zero code kind of thing, is super important in this day and age.
Yeah, makes sense. Sounds good. So Carl, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, what's my side? It's well and truly dark here now, so as you can probably tell. So yeah, I'm looking forward to going off, having a nice, very stereotypical English cup of tea, and enjoy the rest of my evening. So
yeah, sounds good. Thanks so much for doing this with me, and thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate your looking at this and seeing this and giving us any kind of feedback. And I'll see you in one of our webinars soon. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, take care. See you soon. Cheers. Bye.